overlooking the famed, remarkable Forbidden City of China. The Forbidden City was the capital of China, the center of power of China for almost exactly 500 years. And this remarkable structure, therefore, is the center of so much of modern China's history. During the many dynasties of China, the capital was in many places in China. During the Tang Dynasty, for example, around 1500 years ago, the capital was in Chang'an, or today's Xi'an. During the Song Dynasty, the capital was in Haifang during the first part of the Song Dynasty, and then it moved south to Hangzhou in the southern Song period. When the Mongols conquered China and created the Yuan dynasty in 1270, and a dynasty that was to last until 1368 under Mongol rule, the Mongols, being in the north, in the steppelands close to where we are today, created their capital in modern-day Beijing. And in fact, the original Mongol palace, destroyed later by the Ming Dynasty, was where we are now, on this hill, though this hill didn't exist before the excavations that created the Forbidden City. But it's in this place that the Mongols had their capital. The Mongol Yuan dynasty lasted for approximately 1 century, but there was tremendous internal opposition and unrest and various rebellions. And it was about 1 century after the establishment of Yuan rule that one of these rebellions was finally able to overtake and defeat the Yuan dynasty in 1368. That rebellion was led by a peasant military leader who rose from poverty and from peasantry to become the first emperor of the new Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty is crucial in China's history for many reasons, including the reestablishment of Han Chinese rule over China by pushing the Mongols out of China. And the new Ming dynasty established its capital city south of here along the Yangtze River, near to today's Shanghai, in the capital city of Nanjing. But the capital returned to Beijing a few decades later. When the first Ming emperor died, his eldest son had already died, and so imperial rule went to the grandson, to the first son of the first son of the emperor. And that meant that other sons of the first emperor were in a kind of competition for power with the grandson of the emperor. And the prince of this region, the fourth son of the first emperor, the Prince of Yan, who had rule over this region, over what would become Beijing and the capital of China, went to war over control of the Ming dynasty at the end of the 1300s and the first years of the 1400s. And the Prince of Yan defeated the second emperor of the Ming dynasty and became the emperor of the Ming dynasty, an emperor whose name we know by his rule as the Yongle Emperor, a very famed and important emperor of China, One of the reasons for his fame is the Forbidden City itself, because as the prince of this region, as one who had conquered those in power in Nanjing, he decided to move the capital back north, back from the Yangtze River to the North China Plain. And another reason for that is that the threats from the Mongols certainly were not finished, because there would be decades and decades of further battles of the Ming imperial army moving into Mongolia, of the Mongols fighting the Ming, sometimes disastrous losses for the Ming Empire. In other words, lots of threats continuing from the north. A basic theme of China's history, that China was always facing threats from the drylands, the desert and steppeland regions of the north, and that continued into many decades of the Ming Empire. So the Yongle Emperor moved the capital back to this place. And first, under his rule, he had named it as Beiping, the northern city of peace. But then he changed the name, or the name was changed to Beijing, meaning the northern capital, as opposed to Nanjing, meaning the southern capital. So China had its northern capital, and a great construction project took place to build a vast imperial city, and within that vast imperial city, a central portion known to the Chinese as the Purple Forbidden City. Purple being the auspicious star of heaven, which gave the authority to the emperor. Forbidden City because you don't come in here unless you're the emperor or part of the imperial family or part of the imperial retinue. And so this was a city that was forbidden to the common people. The emperor would rule supreme in the Forbidden City. And we're standing on the north side of the Forbidden City, the northern gate of the Forbidden City, and we're looking straight down the north-south central axis of the Forbidden City, because this is a remarkably structured and very, very beautiful and magnificent construction. From the north going south, if we pass through the Forbidden City, at the southern gate, we enter into Tiananmen Square. And if we look all the way to the south and just to the right of this north-south axis, we see the Great Hall of the People, the Great Hall on Tiananmen Square, where so many banquets today take place when foreign leaders come to visit China. Of course, Beijing remains the center of power of China. And the Great Hall of the People is till today a center of power of this capital city. Going from north to south, there are the Imperial Gardens, and then right in the center of the Forbidden City is the imperial residence itself for the emperor and the empress, for the immediate imperial family. And then heading to the south are the official buildings for reception areas and for an extremely important function of Chinese governance for a millennium, and that is the place to take the imperial exams, because China developed a system already going back more than 1,300 years of trying to find excellence in public administration through a formal examination system that would beat nepotism or beat family connections or beat insider connections, but would bring scholar bureaucrats to the forefront. And the idea of knowledgeable scholar bureaucrats is an idea that dates back to Confucian ideals and became central to Neo-Confucianism with the rise of the Sung dynasty. So the imperial exam system, which started with the idea of excellence in the Sui dynasty, followed by the Tang dynasty, became core to the Song dynasty already 1,000 years ago. And the exams for those scholar bureaucrats would take place at the far southern end of the imperial city. Now, this remarkable construction of the new capital, the capital that was to remain the center of power in the Forbidden City itself from the years 1421 until 1912, almost exactly 500 years, was a construction project of 14 years, beginning around 1406, completed around 1420, and then serving as the seat of power for the 5 centuries that followed. And the Yongle emperor, who made Beijing the northern capital of China, was a remarkable emperor and had a remarkable period of rule until his death in 1424. Because it was during that period that much of what would become the Ming pattern of rule, followed afterwards by the Qing dynasty, was set. For example, with the new northern capital, to provision the northern capital to make sure there was adequate grain for what would be a vast metropolis in Beijing, it was necessary to refurbish and extend the Grand Canal. And so it was during the Yongle emperor's rule that the Grand Canal was brought to its full fruition, connecting the Yangtze River with the North China Plain with Beijing to be able to bring vast amounts of grain each year, each harvest, from the south, from the rice-growing regions of the Yangtze River Valley to the north. It was during the Yongle emperor's rule that a vast encyclopedia was created, a vast encyclopedia of knowledge, which made China a center, or the center of knowledge. Remember that this was the place where so many of the most important inventions that would create the modern world developed, and China was a repository of vast knowledge. And perhaps one of the most notable events of the Yongle emperor was the great voyages of the Admiral Zheng He of the Ming era. Voyages 7 in number between 1405 and 1433 that proved China's dominance over the Indian Ocean and that created a marvel of a demonstration of China's power, its technological glory, its navigational capacities, the vast reach of its industrial products as these voyages brought Chinese goods throughout the Indian Ocean region to the lands of the Indian subcontinent, to the islands of Southeast Asia, and as far as Arabia and East Africa. And those voyages of the Admiral Zheng He, therefore, are a remarkable moment of history. They are, of course, a full story of themselves. First, the Admiral Zheng He was actually born into a Mongol Muslim family in Yunnan, and as a boy was captured in the Mongol Ming battles and was castrated as a boy, and therefore grew up as one of the thousands of eunuchs that served the emperor. The class of eunuchs is something, of course, extraordinary in Chinese history. The idea was that castrated boys would grow up to be slave servants, but then later trusted advisors and members of the imperial household, in part eunuchs who could rule over the vast number of concubine households in the imperial retinue, because from the east and the west side of the Forbidden City, what we see are the homes for the concubines, for the many, many concubines of the emperor. And those concubines were ruled by eunuchs who were deemed to be safe as castrated men, not to be a threat to the prerogatives that were only for the emperor. Well, Zheng He grew up as a servant of the royal household, but he was obviously an especially brilliant and talented person, and he rose in great trust with the emperor, and he rose in great knowledge and in capacity, and was entrusted with the imperial fleet and entrusted to lead voyages around Asia, around the Indian Ocean region, and also to sail as far as Africa. The Yongle Emperor wanted to demonstrate China's power, its glory, its culture, its manufacturing, its navigational and military prowess. And these 7 voyages did exactly that. And they helped to put in place and in fact reestablish and solidify the idea of a tributary system, where the powers around China would come and pay symbolic tribute to China, showing China's authority and its cultural dominance of the region. The tributary system was not a means of commercial exploitation per se, or large tribute paid by the other nations and polities around China. It was more a cultural phenomenon to pay due deference to China and its cultural glory. So from 1405 to 1433, voyages involving hundreds of large ships sailed the Indian Ocean, displayed China's incredible prowess, brought back ostriches and zebras and giraffes to the royal court, showing that China was able to amalgamate and pull together the knowledge of the Indian Ocean world. Many historians, and I tend to agree with them, think that had these voyages continued, China would have gone on to continued navigational and trade and political and geopolitical successes, perhaps discovering the sea route through the Pacific to the Americas, perhaps rounding the Cape of Good Hope and sailing to Europe. But instead, in 1433, for a variety of reasons which remain highly debated till today, after the Yongle Emperor's death and then succeeding emperors, the royal court decided to end the voyages. The admiral himself died in 1433. It is supposed on his 7th voyage, though that is not known for sure. But the main point is that no more imperial voyages were undertaken. And moreover, edicts that followed tremendously circumscribed China's outreach to the world, making trade by most Chinese practically impossible, engaging in navigation by Chinese merchants, very, very difficult, except through a very select number of ports, limiting China's contact with the rest of the world. While the historians debate the implications of the end of the voyages, I personally believe that the implications were vast. China not only lost its outward push to the rest of the world, but in many ways lost its window on events of the rest of the world in a way that would prove extremely painful for China in later centuries. In effect, China ceded the oceans to others. Perhaps it was the conservatism of the Confucian court, which believed that China was self-contained. Perhaps it was the continuing risks of invasion from the north, from the Mongols, that meant that spending on the ocean fleet was simply too vast when vast military outlays were needed to defend the northern borders. Whatever the cause of the end of the voyages came to an end. China's trade became much circumscribed. China's role in the oceans was circumscribed, and in effect, China did cede the oceans to the Europeans, because it was just a few decades later that Europe circled the Cape of Good Hope, and Europeans sailed from Western Europe around the southern tip of Africa and into the Indian Ocean, rather than Chinese fleets doing it from east to west, which was absolutely a possibility following Zheng He's triumphant 7 voyages. Europe overtook the seas. Europe became the center of military might and naval might throughout the Indian Ocean, and centuries later it would be Europeans that would come to invade China in the 19th century. In 1839, Britain launched the first of the Opium Wars and forced major concessions by China, indeed ceding control of Hong Kong to Britain. The Second Opium Wars meant more concessions and more internal turmoil, and the Ming Dynasty, followed in 1644 by the Qing Dynasty, went into a downward spiral at the end of the 19th century, increasingly threatened by European imperial powers, internal dissension and unrest, and then by Japan, as Japan industrialized at the end of the 19th century. Well, that brings us to 500 years of the Forbidden City in the first years of the 20th century. In 1911, the Qing Dynasty was overthrown in the revolution led by Sun Yat-sen, and the Republic of China was declared in 1912. The young emperor at the time continued to live in the Forbidden City, but the Forbidden City was no longer the capital of the Republic of China. There was no longer an emperor over China. China had become a republic, though a very unstable, troubled, and threatened republic that would enter a long decades of internal strife, civil war, and then invasion by Japan in the 1930s. Indeed, that young emperor was taken by the Japanese as a figurehead for Japan's control over Manchuria, over Manchukuo. Japanese ruled Manchuria in the 1930s and 1940s, and that emperor died later after a trial and having been found to have betrayed China by serving as a puppet figurehead for Japan, and lived until the 1960s, in fact, when he died as the final emperor of China. So the history of China was decisively changed now 600 years ago, when the capital was moved from the southern capital, Nanjing, to the northern capital, Beijing, where of course it remains today, and it remains the capital of today's People's Republic of China, one of the centers of world globalization, one of the centers of the world economy, one of the pillars of our new multipolar world in the seventh and digital age of globalization.